Just a note before we start. We're working on an upcoming episode about rivers and dams and how they shape the environment around us in often profound and unseen ways. And we want to hear from you. Do you live near a river or a dam? What does it do for you? And what does it mean to you? Let us know. Send us a voice message by going to dw.com/livingplanet and pressing the record button. That's the easiest way. Or you can go the old school route and write us an email to livingplanet@dw.com. We'd love to hear from you. And now, let's get this week's episode started.
I wouldn't say it was that we were scared. It was that we were terrified of the prospects of that happening.
It takes a lot to scare Sean Burney. After 35 years as a nuclear specialist with Greenpeace, the burly Scotsman has worked in some of the most radioactive places on Earth.
The scariest point in terms of nuclear was in 2024, autumn 2024.
Sean is talking about Ukraine, where he now spends most of the year. On August 26th, Russia starts firing more than 200 missiles and drones in one of the largest aerial attacks of the war. It systematically pounds energy infrastructure, hitting gas and coal-fired plants, the grid and transformers. Around 8 million homes lose power.
For the second time in 2 weeks, Russia launched a nationwide strike against Ukraine's energy grid, seen here and
authorities say emergency power outages are in place nationwide, leaving hundreds of
residents in Ukraine's capital Kyiv are woken up by air raid sirens.
Russia has been trying to cripple Ukraine's energy system since it invaded the neighbouring country in February 2022. But this is different, says Sean, because the Russians started targeting electrical substations.
A nuclear plant that's connected to the grid requires what's called grid stability.
And it's the substations that keep power flowing in and out.
There's about 10 of them that are critical to nuclear plant safety.
But during the Russian attack, the grid begins to buckle. 4 reactors disconnect. Plant operators power one down completely.
You were looking at a scenario that really had never been seen in the world before, where multiple reactors would be forced to shut down. Because that instability, the safest option is to shut down the nuclear reactor. And why is that? If you lose electrical power from the grid, it's called a loss of off-site power, a loop, you need to go to your own electricity supply on the plant itself. And in the first instance, that's emergency diesel generators.
That needs to happen within minutes, so electricity is delivered to the water pumps, keeping the extremely hot reactor and spent fuel cool. But those enormous generators have maybe 7 to 10 days of fuel. Restarting a reactor takes far more power than they can provide. It has to come from the grid. If that power isn't restored and fuel runs out or a generator breaks down, cooling systems fail. Within hours, water boils away, exposing the core. Temperatures climb to around 2,700 degrees Celsius. That's the boiling point of steel. The fuel melts, otherwise known as a core meltdown.
I don't really get scared, but that was the really serious moment where you go, okay, Russia knows that Ukraine is faced with this horrendous dilemma. Shut down the reactors before it's too late, or keep operating and risk not just one reactor, not even one nuclear power plant, but multiple reactor failures across Ukraine. So multiple Fukushimas. Radiologically speaking, potentially multiple Chernobyls.
That was the worst-case scenario. But the plants regained off-site power. The grid stabilized, and plant operators were able to restart the reactors. But the risk hasn't gone away. Ukraine says Russia is still trying to knock their nuclear plants offline, plants that now provide more than half of the country's electricity. And the UN's nuclear watchdog, the International Atomic Energy Agency, has called the situation
the world's biggest threat to nuclear safety.
This has left some Ukrainians questioning the vulnerability of a highly centralized energy system and whether nuclear power can ever be truly safe in a time of war. Ukraine knows better than most what a nuclear disaster means.
It's now clear that the Soviet Union has suffered one of the worst disasters in the history of nuclear power. Massive quantities of radiation have apparently been released in an accident at the Chernobyl power station.
On the 26th of April 1986, a reactor at the Chernobyl nuclear power plant exploded, sending radioactive material across Europe. Hundreds of thousands of people were forced to leave their homes, many never to return. It remains the world's worst nuclear disaster.
And we have to ask ourselves whether it is reasonable to rely so heavily on technologies where the consequences of failure are so high, especially in such unstable conditions as war.
I'm Neil King, and this is Living Planet. Russia's attacks on Ukraine's power grid have pushed the country's energy system to the edge and its nuclear plants to the brink of disaster. We'll hear how Ukraine is fighting back with an unexpected weapon: renewable energy. Could building out solar and wind essentially make Ukraine and Europe safer? Stay with us.
There's no shortage of conversations about climate change and our planet, but some questions take a little bit more time to sit with. Green Frequency is a new Earth radio show, a space to follow the ideas shaping how we understand this planet. From oceans storing carbon to what it actually takes to build environmental policy, we explore the science and the systems around it, with the people working at the center of it all. Thoughtful conversations with entry-level nuance and a clearer pathway forward. Tune in to Green Frequency, Earth Radio, wherever you're listening to this now.
One of the reasons that worst-case scenario Sean Burney described hasn't happened is the rapid response of nuclear plant workers under immense pressure. Another is the people keeping the grid alive.
The unbelievable work of the Ukraine grid operators, Ukraine Energo, personnel from companies like DTEC, maintaining the electricity system despite being under assault constantly, every night. And, engineers have died as a direct result of working at these electrical stations, trying to get them repaired and then being hit again.
The most obvious way to reduce the danger would be for Russia to stop targeting the grid. But as long as those attacks continue, Ukraine is being forced to adapt. More than half of the country's electricity generation capacity has been damaged or destroyed. And the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant, once supplying a quarter of Ukraine's electricity, remains under Russian control. The targeting of big thermal power plants and the centralized grid
has been a kind of quite stark revelation of the vulnerability of concentrated energy infrastructure. So Russia has fairly brutally targeted Ukraine's energy infrastructure across the board. And what they found is that targeting thermal power plants, what we'd sort of say is conventional power plants, so these could be nuclear, coal, gas and so on, where they generate a large quantity of electricity, that is a relatively effective way to cause a lot of damage with relatively few missiles.
That's Chris Elliott.
I'm a research fellow in the Environment and Society Centre at Chatham House. I work on geopolitics, trade, climate change and the energy transition.
Chris says Ukraine isn't just rebuilding, it's rethinking how its energy system works.
And what they found is that solar, wind and batteries has tended to be the most effective, the fastest and the most kind of secure way of doing that.
Ukraine's largest private energy company, DTEC,
ran whole fleet of mainly coal-fired power plants prior to the invasion.
But as they've been systematically attacked and DTEC has been trying to repair them,
what they've also found themselves doing is bringing in ever-increasing quantities of wind and solar and batteries because they have found that they tend to be harder to attack and less likely to be targeted by the Russians.
It's not just harder, but also less economical to target smaller and more spread out renewable sources, says Chris.
I think one statistic that they've cited is that it takes one particular missile to take out really a 250 megawatts, say coal-fired power station, but it would take 40 times that amount of missiles to take out the equivalent capacity of wind power generation.
And wind and solar are cheap and quicker to install and quicker to repair than a badly damaged coal plant. And unlike a coal plant, if a drone takes out a solar panel, the lights don't all go out.
So, for example, if there is a solar park, if there is damage to that, it doesn't necessarily need to take everything out because you could swap new panels in.
Big energy companies and Ukrainian NGOs have all been working to bring more green power online. In 2025, about 56% of the country's electricity generation came from nuclear. Coal made up 14%, and renewables, including hydropower, solar and wind, came in at around 21%, jumping from 12% before the invasion. Ukraine has been rolling out small-scale decentralized power, particularly in front-line and high-risk regions, to make the grid harder to knock out and ensure a stable electricity supply to people and businesses. Some of that is smaller gas plants. But a lot of solar is going up on rooftops, municipal buildings, hospitals and schools. In 2025 alone, Ukraine installed enough to power over 1 million homes. The goal now is to nearly double that within 4 years. And the people rolling all that out are doing it under fire.
Fortunately, everything was quiet. We only see the military aircraft who monitoring the sky.
It's March 2026. 25-year-old Lena Kondratyuk is standing in the cold, in total darkness, in the middle of a field somewhere between Ukraine's capital Kyiv and a town called Mykolaiv, about 60 kilometers from the front line. She looks up.
I hadn't seen such starry sky for a long time. Of course, I thought that probably I would see such sky in the mountains at my vacation, but it still was really beautiful.
Lena is standing in this field appreciating the stars because an air raid alarm sounded as the train she was on raced through the darkness. All the passengers have to disembark. It's a Russian attack. Passenger trains are now a target.
We know about that, we know about these risks, and our conversation and dark humor made it lighter because, for example, each evacuation I asked myself, it would be better to burn alive or freeze to death, because that train carriage burns down completely in 9 minutes only. And if you're outside in 0 degrees weather, for over an hour, no matter how warmly you dressed, you start to freeze. And we spent about 2 hours outside to talk about this. Unfortunately, we didn't have answer for this question still.
It's the kind of dark humor, Lena says, helps Ukrainians deal with the reality of war. When the air raid is over, they board the train again and arrive safely at Mykolaiv for the opening of a solar power plant. Lena makes this journey about once a month. She works for the Ukrainian NGO Eco Club, helping bring solar power and battery storage to communities across the country. The trip takes around 13 hours, if it isn't interrupted by air raids. Lena is the youngest in her family.
Yes, on 30 minutes.
She's got a twin brother, who she says doesn't really understand her job.
And they still think that I'm just sitting with my laptops and doing something.
Lena joined Eco Club at 18, after her older sister encouraged her to volunteer.
I didn't have any expectation on it because I have started to study at the university.
She thought she would become an engineer, steady work, well paid. But when she started volunteering, she saw
how these people love this work and what the impact of this work. I understood that I want to have a job with real social impact at the world.
Just before the pandemic, she takes on a role as an analyst. At that point, Eco Club is focused on advocacy, pushing for renewable energy. Then, February 24th, 2022.
reports of explosions across Ukraine.
We are beginning this morning with the breaking news of a full-scale invasion of Ukraine that began overnight after Russian President Vladimir...
I was also scared and shocked because I didn't believe that it can happen. In 2022, I didn't believe the news that all said that it will happen.
The invasion changes everything. The team pivots, first to humanitarian aid, then, as blackouts spread across the country, to energy.
We have started this campaign called Solar Aid for Ukraine because we see that Russia started to shell the energy infrastructure.
For Ukrainians, the constant loud whir of diesel generators are now a familiar sound. They're not only noisy, but polluting, and the fuel needed to run them keeps getting more expensive. Eco Club and its largely European donors want to replace those with solar and batteries. And Lena is asked to step up as project manager, getting those renewable energy projects off the ground. She's just 21.
Actually, I was really scared to take this responsibility because I wasn't sure that I can. I agreed for this offer because of the war, because I understand that, for example, I can die tomorrow.
It's a stark realization for someone so young. But like so many Ukrainians, she has learned to live with the knowledge that everything can change in a moment. She's built routines to hold on to. Morning runs, followed by long breakfasts with coffee.
Because if I do in that, I feel this stability, because I don't have stability at anyone in my life. And even if I have plan for a year for all my projects at work, I see that in the end of the year, all my plans was not as I planned. I need to create a new way, for example, to do other activities, or there is a shelling or some damage I need to replace. And it's really hard, but it's lessons learned for everyone in Ukraine is you should to adapt.
Since then, Lena has helped bring nearly 90 solar power systems online across Ukraine. Travelling through a country at war wasn't easy at first. She lives in Rivne, in the west, far from the front. Her first trip to Mykolaiv, just 60 kilometers from the fighting, was daunting.
I've never been in Mykolaiv before the war. I was checked all information, how far away Mykolaiv from the front line, how often air alarms happened, how often shelling in it. And actually it's only 60 kilometers from front line, and I was really scared to go there.
While Lena was there, the city was shelled by the Russians.
There is no electricity, and I thought that I didn't want to come back to the city because I am scary. I have the anxiety about it.
But Lena did go back.
I met a lot of kind people in Mykolaiv, and I see how the people even near the front lines can live. They continue to work, they continue to have the normal weekend, they continue to have the dreams and plan their life in the future. And they teach that it's even during such wartime, it's still possible to find happy moments in your life and continue it.
In Mykolaiv, Lena says solar and batteries are helping utilities to keep water flowing during blackouts and ensure hospitals can keep caring for patients and doing surgeries even when the grid goes down. Sometimes blackouts can last up to 16 hours, and locals will turn up at the facilities that have solar to charge their phones and in winter get warm.
The important point that renewable energy in Ukraine is not about the climate and sustainability, it's about surviving now, because we see how the water utilities and hospitals need this electricity during the power outages. And for each Ukrainian, it's about the access to the basic needs.
One project particularly close to her heart brought solar power to a long-stay care home for women with mental health and neurological issues. Before the solar panels, staff were waking up at 4 a.m. to get breakfast ready before the power cuts. Blackouts shaped the entire day. Often no hot meals, no TV, sometimes no electricity at all.
And after that, they was happy because they have access to everything. They can watch TV in every hours of day when they want to do it. And it was really grateful and happy to see the smiles of their faces.
Lena says the solar plant has also helped the home save money to put into improving conditions for the people living there, who are often overlooked by the Ukrainian government.
Personally, this project discovered for me that I thought that I didn't, and I am not an empathetic person, but I am, because every time when I visit this facility, I wanted to give everything that I want and help them as my best, because I see how these people are vulnerable and how they need our help of it.
In January 2026 alone, Russia fired more than 6,000 attack drones, 5,500 aerial bombs, and 158 missiles at Ukrainian infrastructure, repeatedly targeting thermal power plants, electricity substations, and district heating facilities. Ukrainians are already dreading the next winter. The last one was the harshest in 16 years, with temperatures dropping to minus 21 degrees Celsius. Things were particularly bad on the front lines, where families live in damaged homes with unreliable heating and electricity. Even in Rivne, in her office, Lena felt it.
Usually we spend a day at the office with winter coat on ourselves, with hat and even with gloves, because it was really cold, and not only outside but also inside.
Lena also lives with blackouts, though not as frequently as in other parts of the country. Often outages are scheduled, and she plans her day accordingly, having important meetings and doing work around those. Last winter, some colleagues in other parts of Ukraine had to work
in the evening or even in the night, because it's only the time when they have the electricity to do it.
Aside from changes to her workday, Lena says her reading habits have significantly improved. And
talking about the Netflix, I download series or movies from my phone and watching later, and I buy additional power banks for home. I try to cook food in a few days, not only for one day. I also started to often visit, for example, my family, my parents at the home, because they have electricity, and hi mom, I will visit you today for the dinner.
For Ukrainians, the priority is simple: keep the lights and heat on. That has meant keeping nuclear plants running throughout the war, despite the risks. So far, they've operated without major incident. Without them, experts say Ukraine would be in a far worse position, considering how much of its fossil fuel plants have been knocked offline.
But we see that, for example, solar power can't cover electricity demand in the winter. They can help in the summertime a lot, but in the winter we should find another way to help to survive communal facilities in Ukraine.
Alongside expanding renewables, Ukraine is also planning at least 9 new nuclear reactors, some being built in the country's west and others in the south, partly to compensate for the loss of the Zaporizhzhia plant occupied by Russia. That would bring around 11.25 gigawatts online. The cost of one reactor would be at least $5 billion. In a recent survey, 80% of Ukrainians supported the nuclear plans, and 95% backed renewables expansion. So, is the lesson no nuclear in the future energy mix? It depends on who you ask. Lena and Greenpeace's Sean Burney say countries, including Ukraine, should concentrate on expanding solar and wind with industrial and small-scale battery storage as much as they can.
And for me, it's not, of course, saying that nuclear energy is bad, because even now a part of energy system depends on the nuclear power in Ukraine. But it clearly shows the importance of diversification and decentralization of energy in Ukraine.
But at the same time,
pretty much all the G7,
that's Germany, France, Canada, the US, Japan, Italy, and the UK,
are saying we need to build nuclear plants. But they also made a statement, I guess because they're not called out by people, saying, well, hang on a second, you're saying let's build lots of nuclear. But on the other hand, you're saying, because of the lessons of Ukraine, we need to decentralize. Okay, what one do you really believe? My own sense is that the energy transition, it's, that train has already left the station. We're moving towards a massive rollout, even greater rollout of renewable energy. Economics, basically, that wins on this.
In the short term, they also want tougher sanctions on Russia's nuclear industry, similar to ones for oil, gas and coal. Countries like Hungary and Slovakia still buy uranium from Rosatom, the state company that occupies nuclear power plant Zaporizhzhia. They say banning it would threaten their energy security. The EU is looking for alternatives, but has no firm timeline. Chris has been looking at what others can learn from Ukraine when it comes to energy resilience. For him, the main lessons from Russia's war in Ukraine when it comes to energy, lessons that the European Union is also paying attention to, is a better geographical spread of infrastructure.
And yeah, that is basically agnostic of the power generation source.
While nuclear and fossil fuel plants are still doing a lot of heavy lifting in Ukraine, diversifying energy supply with a lot of renewables and storage is another big lesson.
The sort of initial impetus behind rolling out renewable energy and electrification was, tackling climate change by reducing greenhouse gas emissions, which is really important still. But at the same time, sort of post the Russian invasion of Ukraine, there was a huge, in response to that, a huge deployment of renewables as Europe realised we need to be less reliant on gas. It's a really fossil fuel poor continent, and it was never going to have anywhere near enough to meet its own needs.
Global instability, including oil price hikes linked to conflict in the Strait of Hormuz, could only sharpen Europe's desire to move away from fossil fuel imports and gain more energy independence through decarbonising. Another lesson is making sure
you've got the right components, you've got stockpiles of these components. That's not things like, I wouldn't say that's things like stockpiling sort of critical minerals. It's more like the vital parts of your system that keep everything turned on.
And those components should all be standardized for easy and quick replacement, meaning restoration takes days instead of weeks. But back to the question, do we need nuclear? Chris is very optimistic about where renewables are headed and how fast. Batteries are getting cheaper, and advances are being made in the duration of long-term storage. Grids just need building out and adapting. That's the big bottleneck. His view is,
there's this narrative of scarcity with renewables at the moment. There's not going to be enough. Actually, we're not too far away from there being too much on some levels.
For its part, Ukraine wants to phase out coal by 2035 and to reach 27% renewables in final energy consumption by 2030. On nuclear, Chris is pragmatic rather than prescriptive. Ukraine is dependent on it, as is France, which has over 50 reactors, and that's not changing soon.
I'm not sure I would necessarily say we should, one or the other government should invest tens of billions in a new nuclear plant rather than renewables and batteries. I think you'd have to think very carefully about that. But I do think that it's part of the European energy mix at the moment, and I don't see why that wouldn't continue. You just need to be quite careful about thinking it can deliver all these benefits. And I think there is potentially an argument that and this has been sort of shown with the Ukraine experience, you do want to have some diversity.
Chris says there's still debate in energy systems modelling. Some scenarios get to 100% renewables, others closer to 90%. But he thinks the real point is often missed. There's no silver bullet.
I mean, it's actually a really interesting exercise, but ultimately you just want to build out as much low carbon as you can, and you want to make it as secure as you can while you're doing it.
So basically trying to de-risk the dangers of running nuclear power in a war, moving away from buying nuclear fuel from Rosatom, And also bolstering your renewables against cyber attacks, for example.
It's awful, but it's almost been a laboratory of what can happen. And I think it's really important that Europe and other countries as well do draw the right lessons, because otherwise it's almost an insult. It's like they've gone through this terrible experience, they're continuing to go through it. They've shown amazing sort of ingenuity at rebuilding fast, and it's told us a lot about what's vulnerable and what you need to consider and what can be targeted. It's actually really, really important that Europe does take these lessons on board.
Lena says she's glad she was born long after Chernobyl, even as she lives through a different kind of disaster in Ukraine. One she doesn't expect to end soon.
Unfortunately, in this question, I am a pessimist.
But Lena and others in Ukraine are looking to what happens after the war.
I still want to live there. I still want to help my country. I still want to continue my work at the Eco Club. And I still think that even after the war and after our victory, there would be even more work compared to now, because we have to rebuild country and rebuild it in a greener and better way.
This episode of Living Planet was researched and produced by Jennifer Collins. It was edited and soundscaped by me, Neil King. Our sound engineer was Ziad Sleiman. What did you think of this episode? Send us a voice message. Just go to dw.com/livingplanet and hit the record button. Of course, you're also free to write us an email, livingplanet@dw.com. That's it for this week. Thanks for listening and sharing Living Planet.